they just came at the end and found him kind of standing to the side, is what she says in the lawsuit, with the school administrator who, according to the suit, when the grandmother arrived to pick him up, she rubbed the top of his head and said, "We don't accept this here."
What does it take to get a more in-depth look into the week's top local news story? The Debrief brings you inside for a one-on-one conversation with our reporters. Every week, right here, right now. The Debrief. We spotted some exclusive reporting in the New York Daily News about an incident in Queens and a young student who enrolled in a Catholic school. He had cornrows as a hairstyle, and the principal told him and his grandmother that he would have to change that if he wanted to stay in the school. So that led us to want to know more, and we've invited Mike Elsen-Rooney, who covers education for the Daily News, to be with us on this edition of the Debrief podcast. Mike, welcome.
Thank you so
much. Your debut. We hope you'll come back. Mike, give an overview. We have seen this now kind of become more discussed in the public realm. We recall the wrestler last year who had his hair cut just before a match, and that led to a whole series of events. Tell us what you reported on this week, and then we'll talk about it.
Yeah, so the incident that I wrote about was an 8-year-old named Jediah Batts, whose mom enrolled him in a Catholic school, Immaculate Conception in Jamaica, Queens, last summer. And when he got there on the first day, the principal informed him that their policy prohibited boys' hair in braids. And they gave him and his family about 5 days to change his hairstyle. His mom tried to reach out to the school to see if she could work something out. She never reached the principal, but the school didn't seem to budge, and so she decided she would rather withdraw him from the school than force him to change his hair.
Why don't you add some more color that you did have in your print story. Here is a mom who wanted the best for her son, she said, and he had been at a school that she thought was underperforming, so she was excited to get him into Immaculate Conception. Yeah,
so, she felt like the school was going to be a really good fit, and in fact, his first day at school was a great day, aside from this incident. Yeah. So they bought a new uniform. There's a picture of him in his spiffy light blue button-down shirt tucked into his pants.
Which were her expenses, by the way, she says.
Paid $250 for that. In addition to $275 to register him. He had a great day at the school, but they just came at the end and found him kind of standing to the side, is what she says in the lawsuit, with the school administrator who, according to the suit, when the grandmother arrived to pick him up, she rubbed the top of his head and said, "We don't accept this here."
So she was upset that was said in front of him because he's young and forming an impression of himself, and she thought that made him feel like something was wrong with him, correct?
Yeah, the way she phrased it was when this administrator said, "We don't accept this here," it felt to her and to her son like, "We don't accept you here."
When the principal rubbed his head and told him told my mother that the braids were unacceptable, Jediah stood firm. He told the principal, "I'm not cutting my hair." But then afterwards, he came home and he asked me questions like, "Well, Mom, like, what's wrong with my hair? I was born like this, and why do I have to cut it?" So he was a little upset, and I just had to, reassure him that, nothing was wrong with his hair, and he was fine.
Interesting. And as I was looking this up, I kind of Googled some other stories and found one almost similar in another state, almost word for word, the experience. So what you pointed out, Mike, though, is that what many people may not realize, and that's what we want to talk to in a broader perspective, is a new law here in New York State that was passed directly speaking to these kinds of things. Explain it.
Yeah, so that was what was particularly interesting about the timing of this story. The state just amended its anti-discrimination law in July to specifically include hairstyles as one of the protected qualities that people can't use to discriminate against you, either in work or in school. So this comes on the heels of New York City in February issuing guidelines through its Commission on Human Rights, laying out hairstyles that are traditionally black hairstyles, and it gives a list of examples, actually.
Braids, twists, cornrows, locks, those things associated with African Americans,
exactly.
Caribbean culture.
And the idea is that policies that prohibit those specific types of hairstyles are disproportionately impacting African Americans and black people.
Governor Cuomo signed it. California had done it as well. Other states are looking into it. You do report what the school's handbook says about it. And, some people may listen and say, well, doesn't a school, an entity, a police department, the military get a certain right to say how they want in terms of facial hair and hair on your head? So what does the school handbook say about it?
Yeah, so the copy of the school handbook that we reviewed gave a list of banned hairstyles for boys. It described them as no fad hairstyles, and they had a couple other examples, mohawks, things, And so some people say, well, rules are rules, these equally apply to everybody. But I think the counterpoint to that would be that if you single out a hairstyle that is traditionally or almost exclusively used by one racial group, then the policy is inherently discriminatory.
And you got the sense from his mom that this is part of him.
Yeah, no, he's always really valued his hair, and he's a kid with a lot of personality who has a strong sense of himself, and hair was a big part of that.
Kind of explain to him the impact that this has, because, there's possibly have been other kids who may have gone to that school and who had to get their hair cut off and didn't want to. And I just explained to him that, he's kind of making a difference now and, kind of paving the way for kids who might come across, silly rules like this. And, so he feels good about it now.
This is where it stands now. We wanted to talk about it because this will be, as the attorney explained to you, he feels a test of this new law in New York State.
Yeah, this is, what he said was this was one of the first case he had seen that specifically referenced this new law. There is an interesting wrinkle here that, this is a religious school, a religious institution. He said that there may be some cases under the state law where religious expression is exempt, but the lawyer's argument was that a prohibition on braids or on hairstyles generally is not really directly related to the expression of religion. It's just a set of rules that this Catholic school had.
The second school that we moved him to was actually a Catholic school as well, and it's absolutely ridiculous. But one of the first questions that I had for the administrator there was, what is your hair policy about boys with braids or long hair? And she said, we absolutely do not. Boys can have their hair anyway. We have boys' hair with braids, dreads, whatever. It doesn't matter. He loves his new school. He's happy now. He gets to have his new braids, and he has even said that there's a couple boys in his class that has braids.
And this lawyer, Oliver Coppell, former New York City Council member, former acting state attorney general?
Yeah.
All right. Well, listen, this is some good reporting, and since you're here, we always like to learn more about those who visit us on the Debrief, and you've had kind of an interesting path here to this Daily News education beat. Talk to me a little bit about it.
Yeah, so I started out my career as a teacher, high school teacher, then I worked at an after-school program for elementary schoolers, and I loved a lot of aspects of it, got a little burnt out, experienced, I think, some of the things that a lot of teachers do. But there were so many important issues that I felt like I was getting a front row seat to that I wanted to continue to engage with in some way, and writing felt like the best way for me to do that, and reporting.
Okay. Now, if you're listening to us in the podcast, you can't tell that Mike is considerably younger than me. But if you are watching us on YouTube, you can see that. But I always have a question for those. I've been doing it for a while. At this particular time where journalism comes under such scrutiny, when newspaper readership is declining, when even our local news viewership is declining, when faith and credibility is being called into question, and yet there is a great need. What leads someone now into journalism, which there's a fantastic need for people like you, but what draws you?
So for me, I think the hook was finding out that there are education journalists in particular who are really making efforts to make sure education reporting doesn't go away. There's nonprofit initiatives, there's kind of, ways that education journalists are mobilizing. And so as someone who was skeptical about this as a career path, that was really encouraging for me to see that, no, there are people trying to make this work. There are, new models forming, and, to learn that the Daily News, a place that's, certainly had its
challenges,
still continues to really value education reporting, was really exciting and kind of good timing there, and yeah.
Well, I'm glad you're doing it, Mike. Thank you for stopping by. Hopefully you'll come back and see us with other stories of import to the tri-state, and also maybe a follow-up on this one.
Appreciate it.
Mike Elsen-Rooney, New York Daily News Education Beat. And P.S., shortly after we talked to Mike, we did get a statement from the Brooklyn Diocese, so I want to read that. As a private religious institution, Immaculate Conception Catholic Academy in Jamaica has the legal right to set standards in many areas, including hair. However, it is the school's policy to be culturally sensitive, and therefore this policy is being reviewed. So there you have it, another chapter, and will likely be an ongoing discussion. I'm your host, David Ushery, coming to you from our busy newsroom here at 30 Rock. We want to thank our producers, Jesse Edwards, Ben Berkowitz, of the NBC New York digital team, and we'll check you next time on The Debrief.
Thank you for watching this video from NBC4 New York. You can subscribe by tapping the button below me, and on the left you can see our latest updates, investigations, and digital exclusives. We'll see you next time.